Imagine
A podcast.
where time drifts slowly,
A podcast.
where
Isaac.
carries you away.
So let me be clear. We tortured some folks.
If you don't like what we tell you to believe in, we'll kill you.
For 40 years, secret terrorist organizations, many trained by Western intelligence agencies, have manipulated the political control of European sovereign states by a campaign of terror and murder. Originally part of a secret network, these groups changed from being defenders of state security into attackers of the established political order. Until 2 years ago, that secret network was generally known by the single word, Gladio.
Hey, hi, hello, it's Isaac. Welcome to another episode of Coexist Inc. I'm feigning excitement because I'm very sad. I'm very sad about the way things are going. I don't want to say I'm right to be as pessimistic as I've been recently, but I'm not wrong. I recorded this upcoming episode with good friend Eyes Wide Open, where we talk about Operation Gladio. We talk about the history of Operation Gladio, starting, just before the end of World War II, all the way to the present, that we might be in domestic Gladio right now. We recorded this episode on Thursday, lamenting the possibility of some sort of domestic terror attack, a false flag, as people know it, to manufacture consent to embroil us in another Middle Eastern conflict that will just kill millions of innocent people. And we were wrong in that they didn't even need to manufacture consent. They didn't need to even do a domestic Gladio event to declare war on another country. They just did it. They just went ahead and did it. And so you'll hear Eyes Wide and me talk about what could happen, and I just can't believe it happened as fast as it did. And again, without any need to blow up a couple of twins, if you know what I'm saying. They just did it. It doesn't mean, though, that there won't be Gladio-type events. And for those of you who don't know what Gladio is, it's better to understand what the strategy of tension is, which is just to sow violent conflict that consolidates power to authoritarian states, that people experience random, inexplicable, horrific acts of violence, and they turn to the state to protect them, even though it's the state itself that is coordinating and executing these attacks. This strategy of tension can take many forms. And a lot of us wondered if the recent assassinations in Minnesota were Gladio events. Vance Bolter, the man who shot those two Minnesota politicians, is a strange cookie. And even stranger still are a lot of the events surrounding the assassination themselves. Vance Bolter dressed up like a police officer, kind of like in the Drive mask, if you remember the movie with Ryan Gosling. People are calling it like the Heisenberg mask from that show that everyone loves that I don't much care for. He went to the home of, I believe, a state senator, Senator Hoffman, and shot him and his wife. However, they survived. After that execution attempt, he went to another person's house, a state representative's house, and shot her and her husband. Now, the police actually intercepted Bolter at the second home because they did a quote-unquote wellness check on this other home after they found out about those shootings, which is odd to intercept at that exact same time. It's possible, but still strange. Stranger still is that this man got away on foot after engaging with the police. We still don't know all the events surrounding these murders, but suffice it to say, it's strange. After a few days, they got Vance Bolter, and even before they found him, we were learning a bit of who he was. Strange cookie. He was a store manager of 7-Eleven for 6 years before he started his own security company that went as far as, like, I think Lebanon and Gaza. He was also attempting to be a charismatic evangelical preacher in the Congo. And judge for yourself just how charismatic this fella was.
And I'm just as excited about Jesus.
Et je suis juste excité
Right
de
here,
Jésus.
right now.
Jusqu'à présent, même maintenant.
And when I get excited,
Et quand je suis excité,
I want to dance.
je veux danser.
And what Jesus did for me.
C'est que Jésus a fait pour moi.
Jesus is God.
Jésus est
Almighty
Dieu.
God.
C'est le Dieu
He
puissant.
saved my life.
Il a sauvé ma vie.
Woo! I'm excited about God.
Je suis excité de Dieu.
And I want to worship Him.
Et c'est pourquoi je l'adore.
Because He's coming again. And He's
Jésus, il
excited.
revient encore.
And He's got plans. He's
Il
got
a
plans
de plans
and purposes
et le dessein
for each one of you
pour chacun de vous ici.
and for me.
Et pour moi aussi.
So we still are putting the pieces together. They are strange. He has just come out and said that Tim Walz instructed him to murder Amy Klobuchar, the senator of Minnesota. Who knows at this point precisely what's going on. But it is one of those strange events that makes people alarmed, and it's inexplicable and scary. I think why this falls under a strategy of tension, or why this might qualify as a sort of Gladio type event, is that during Operation Gladio, during the Years of Lead, during the strategy of tension, what they would do is they would have these right-wing paramilitary Nazis or mafiosos do a mass shooting, a bombing, an execution, an assassination, and then blame it on the socialists. That's what's happening with this Vance Bolter guy. Immediately, some of the first people who broke the identity of this shooter were right-wingers. You even had the senator from Utah, Mike Lee, say this is what communism is. And now we're spending all this time trying to correct the record, but the damage has already kind of been done in a way, and people will think that this was left-wing violence. They'll point to the printer paper that was found in his car, like from Kinko's, that just said "No Kings" on it as evidence that this guy was a Democrat. So we can expect potentially more and more events like this. You already see a lot of conservatives saying to expect some sort of retribution from Iran, from these sleeper cells, they call them. So we'll see. Again, they didn't have to manufacture consent or commit an act of terror in order to get us involved in the war, but it's always in their pocket, it seems. One thing that I think you should do, some of the consent manufacturing, or one of the lines I hear a lot that is supposed to justify bombing the fuck out of Iran and killing innocent civilians, giving Israel weapons to kill children in another country, is that Iran says death to America. And I have to tell you, that means you've clearly never dated and fallen in love with a Persian woman before. These people speak in a way that shouldn't be taken quite so literally. When an Iranian says death to something, that's the equivalent of us saying, God damn this thing. So when you see, some old lady, cuts you off in the car, you go, damn her. Damn her. Do you really want to damn her soul for eternity to hell? No, of course not. When you see some guy you don't like, fuck him. Yeah, fuck that guy. Are you saying you want to have sex with that guy? Is that what you're trying to say? So when you hear these conservatives, and even Democrats, that pathetic loser on CNN, Vance Jones, is saying, they say death to America, death to Israel. No, they don't literally mean that. So don't let the people get away with that. Don't let them fall for it. Enjoy our long history on Operation Gladio, which only scratches the surface of this really sinister event in the 20th century. Oh, and so as not to just be a total bummer all the time, good things do happen in the world, and our boy Mahmoud Khalil is out on bail, and that doesn't mean his ordeal is over, but it's really great seeing him free and able to be with his family. And the champ that he is, like the real mensch that our boy Mahmoud Khalil is, immediately he goes to protesting for Palestine again. So, Mahmoud, this song is for you.
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough to enjoy life so much when you just see what's kind of happening around you, and you're like, oh, fuck. The white liberal guilt. I think I don't think I've ever felt it so strong in my life as I have recently.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, for me, it's just been like a perpetual sense of dread, especially since like last weekend. I mean, I see all the people on Twitter, like, kind of like, rightfully so, like being like very sort of excited about this Iranian counter attack. But I don't know. All I can think about is the retaliation. Like, I cannot. Like, I all I can think about is just the complete annihilation that's going to happen whenever this barrage is over and whenever Israel can finally get the United States to join, which I don't think is that far away.
Yeah, did you see Trump said, and within 2 weeks, you will know.
Yeah, he's such a fucking clown, man. Like, it's like...
It really does depend on his capriciousness, and that's how do you plan for that? How do you plan for someone's whims like this?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I honestly don't know. I honestly, like, I open Twitter now and I just feel like immediate dread. Like I said, like it feels like we're closer than ever really to World War III and to sort of to potentially annihilation even, I will say. Like we were talking about the Samson option a bit in DMs, and I mean, I'm starting to really believe that it's a true thing.
I sometimes wonder, though. I mean, everything feels like it's some origami psyop. You don't know. Everything's folded in these bizarre ways that perhaps Cy Hirsch is an operative of the Israeli government and made up the fact that they have nukes so that people think they have nukes. I mean, that's my most optimistic take on all this, is that Israel pretends it has nukes. I don't know. I'm just pulling that out of my ass, but I had that thought the other day that perhaps there are no nukes, and there are those people who believe that there are no such things as nukes. Have you heard of those people?
I absolutely have heard that. Yeah, nukes are fake theory, and I mean, if you can believe that, like, and that makes you feel better. Sure. I mean, I genuinely believe that they do exist, and I for the record, I do believe that Israel does have nukes. I mean, it's been what now? Almost 70 years since Dimona and that whole fiasco. I mean, I think they have nuclear weapons. I guess the question is, have they been weaponizing those nuclear weapons in a sort of blackmail strategy, as the Samson option implies, right? That they're telling all their allies, you stand up for us or we're going to nuke your cities. Like that's sort of the question.
Yeah, and how psychotic are they? How willing are they to actually go through with it? And if anybody is, it's Israel.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, there's no doubt in my mind that if there was one country to pull this kind of shit off. But anyways, that's been on my mind lately, to say the least.
Yeah, it's been on my mind a lot. It's been hard to work. It's been hard to think about anything else. And it is conflicting. I mean, I see some people celebrating that footage of the Iranian ballistic hypersonic missiles that just are, it's a sight to behold. I mean, just that thing, just a little light in the sky, and all of a sudden it's just nosediving into
Yeah.
Tel Aviv, is both. I guess you could interpret it as a symbol, some video of like actual resistance and comeuppance. But the other part of me is just like, that's just fucking scary that thing exists at all. That scares the shit out of me.
Absolutely. I mean, it makes the so-called Iron Dome look like, a complete, an open field. And apparently, like, I've read, from like OSINT accounts or whatever, that apparently like Iran has a whole arsenal of these things just waiting to go. And they've been just launching their kind of dumb rockets and they're saving these for later. Right. So I guess we'll see if there's more to come. But yeah, definitely terrifying. I mean, and I know that, what we're seeing here from Iran is just a minuscule grain of sand compared to what the United States has, in terms of these capabilities and in terms of China's capabilities, et cetera, et cetera. So if things were really to hit the fan, like how many of these like are barraging cities around the world? It's truly terrifying.
And the Christian Zionist component of it, like Trump is not a believer in that regard. And my hope is that somebody gets in his ear and just says, you can't, like, you've gone far enough. Let's find a way to save face. And maybe that's where all the libs need to be like, listen, Trump, if you're a big pussy and you say, psych, I'm not doing this, we'll give you the Nobel Prize if you literally don't do this.
Well, they should give me the Nobel Prize for Rwanda, and if you look, the Congo, or you could say Serbia, Kosovo, you could say a lot of them. You could say, the big one is India and Pakistan. I should have gotten it 4 or 5 times. I should get it for the, I would think the Abraham Accords would be a good one too. They won't give me a Nobel Peace Prize because they only give it to liberals.
Yeah,
if you can dangle that carrot.
Do you think he gives a shit though about a Nobel Prize?
Absolutely. Oh my
think
God.
So?
Oh my God. He cares so much about these kinds of accolades.
It's about 500,000. It's about the whole community.
We're going to look into it very
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Mr. President.
And you had the Nobel Prize.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
But
They gave it to you for what reason? Maybe you could explain. And I'd like to congratulate you on winning the Nobel Peace Prize. It's a very great achievement. Thank you very much. Nobel Peace Prize? Yes, sir. Well, I just think that President Moon was very nice when he suggested it.
Mr. President.
They're going to get a Nobel Prize for a lot of things if they gave it out fairly, which they don't. Prime Minister Abe of Japan gave me the most beautiful copy of a letter that he sent to the people who give out a thing called the Nobel Prize. I am asking them to give you the Nobel Peace Prize. I said, thank you. Many other people feel that way too. I'll probably never get it, but that's okay. They gave it to Obama. He didn't even know what he got it for.
I think he's been angling for such a thing for quite some time. And so I think that if someone could put that carrot in front of him, it might actually prevent World War III and the annihilation of humanity as we know it.
You raise a good point there, that at least in the Oval Office right now, there's not one of these apocalyptic types. You read Mike Huckabee's text on your show last time, and this guy is just ready for the rapture. He's waiting.
And I wonder too. Is he a true believer? Is it just business as usual? I have a very hard time. I've met so few true believers in my life. Maybe I might even cut this stupid thought out, but you can't be a vegan if you eat meat.
Right.
And so to call yourself a Christian when you do other things that are very un-Christian-like, does it make a difference, I wonder? I don't know.
I think that the current, evangelical movement that's gaining ground across the world right now. I don't know if you saw that video of all those evangelicals in London, dancing. It seems like they're bending the rules of what it means to be a Christian so much that it's not even resembling at all, or they pick and choose what passages in the Bible they want to, justify their, horrendous worldview or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. Jesus was apparently an anarcho-capitalist who, wanted everybody to, build infinite oil wells or whatever, and bomb every country in the Middle East. I don't know, right? Like this seems to be like where the direction is going. How many true Christians are there anymore? That's a good question. Most of the people that I see are true Christians are older folks. Like I think younger people that I see are Christians, especially on the internet. Which again, how many of these people are actually real? I ask that every day as well. But I'm like, what does it even mean to be a Christian anymore? Like, especially like in these very kind of politicized evangelical communities.
The bottom tier of these people who identify as Christians are like believers in as much as they're capable of believing, I guess. The high priests, the Joel Austins, they're businessmen. It's about the acquisition of wealth. So do they actually want to nuke Iran and blow up the earth and have the second coming of the Messiah? I doubt it. I doubt that they actually really believe that. I mean, I know Mike Huckabee has a really big mansion here in Florida on Walton Beach, and does he not want to sit on his porch and drink some Arnold Palmer on it anymore? Is he done with that in his old age? Maybe. I don't know.
I think he thinks there's a bigger, better mansion waiting for him in heaven, Florida.
Oh God, Florida. If heaven was Florida, God help us all, dude. At least his version of Florida. The other thing we're seeing a lot, and that's what the subject of this episode is going to be, is the threat of a sort of false flag event that might lead to the direct intervention of the United States in Iran. And so the other word we're hearing, everyone knows what a false flag is. I think that's pretty common. But I don't think that most people know what Operation Gladio is. Even I have a pretty rudimentary understanding of what Operation Gladio is because it's quite sprawling and it went on for decades and it's probably still happening right now as we speak. And so I wanted to have you on the show, my personal expert, because I've watched all your videos on it, up to talk about the history of Operation Gladio and whether we are experiencing what domestic Gladio is and if we're in a domestic Gladio era right now.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that actually Operation Gladio, what I've noticed like over the past 3-4 years is it's becoming a bit of a household name. I mean, I think that or household understanding. It's almost cracked into the mainstream, I will say, to the same level that MK Ultra did maybe 20 or 30 years ago. Mm-hmm. I think that it's really, really prescient right now. And I've been seeing it, popping up on a lot of social media and I'll say even normie social media. It's starting to sort of make a crack because there's so much to pull out of this operation. And much like MK Ultra and much like COINTELPRO and these operations that we really don't understand the full breadth of, you can really apply it as a model. And you can look at this structure and apply it to different scenarios throughout history and theorize, et cetera, if this same sort of strategy was being applied elsewhere.
So what is that though? I mean, and before we get into the actual history of it, if you wanted to give somebody just like a nut graph of Operation Gladio, what would you call it? How would you describe it?
Well, I would certainly start with the strategy of tension, and that's at the heart of it. And I think Operation Gladio gets used as this umbrella term when in reality we should be using the term strategy of tension. Gladio is referring to a very specific operation in Italy from 47 to the end of the Cold War, broadly. The strategy of tension is what's really being referred to when people say, quote unquote, domestic Gladio. So it's essentially the theory behind the operation that it was originally invented or conceived to counter the rise of left-wing movements in Western Europe. So in countries that were, quote unquote, liberal democracies after the end of the Second World War and that were under the NATO umbrella. The strategy of tension envisions the sporadic use of terror events perpetrated by both right-wing and left-wing elements in order to create a perpetual state of chaos within a country that is experiencing strong left-wing movements, usually communist movements during the Cold War. This state of chaos that is created is then exploited by the government. Usually in these countries, they were, like a Christian democratic, sort of what we would call like a sort of centrist liberal European government to enact more draconian measures of security. For example, cracking down on extremist groups such as on both sides, both fascists and communists, but much more directed towards the communists, as that's where the real threat to the state apparatus was. So allowing for further crackdown on these groups under the sort of banner of anti-terrorism. So that's, in a nutshell, the strategy of tension. Very simply, orchestrating terror acts in order to have the casus belli to crack down on extremist groups, especially on the left.
Now, I think that the history of Operation Gladio begins, in my mind, with this character named Reinhard Gehlen. Would you say that's kind of accurate?
Yeah. I mean, you can start a lot of roads with Reinhard Gehlen, right? I mean, I would say maybe. Well, I mean, I'm not going to go on a whim here, but arguably top 5, maybe top 10 most important characters of the immediate post-war period, in my opinion, And I'm looking at things from, like, obviously, like a conspiratorial lens, as always, but in my opinion, like, Reinhard Gehlen is one of those key figures. I don't know, like, what's your conception of Reinhard Gehlen and his importance in this?
Well, I think that when I learned about him, it seemed like Christoph Waltz's character in Inglourious Basterds is kind of based on him.
Gentlemen, I have no intention of killing Hitler and killing Goebbels and killing Goering and killing Bormann, not to mention winning the war single-handedly for the Allies, only later to find myself standing before a Jewish tribunal. If you want to win the war tonight, we have to make a deal.
What kind of deal?
The kind you wouldn't have the authority to make. However, I'm sure this mission of yours has a commanding officer. A general. I'm betting for OSS would be my guess. Ooh, that's a bingo.
Yeah.
Except that instead of betraying Hitler, he betrayed the Soviets. Or he helped the Dulles brothers betray the Soviets.
So Gehlen was the head of military intelligence on the Eastern Front. So he was not an SS guy. He was a like military intelligence. So he was mostly a soldier. But he was pretty much Hitler's top spy on the Eastern Front. And if you know anything about the Eastern Front of World War II, it was some of the most brutal fighting, some of the most egregious war crimes committed on the Eastern Front. I mean, we're talking, like death squads moving eastwards throughout rural Russia and those eastern countries. So some of the nastiest shit you can imagine.
Right.
And
if you want to know more about that, just watch the movie Come and See.
Yeah. That's a trip. That's a trip, and it does actually very accurately sort of embody or portray that front. So Gehlen was in charge of all military intelligence on that Eastern Front, and in the process, he was able to create, arguably, and I will say with certainty, the most intricate and solid intelligence network on the other side of the Iron Curtain at the end of World War II. So imagine this, right? He's the one that's doing all this intelligence work in the Eastern Front. Well, once the Soviets come back across and meet the U.S. and the Brits in Germany, right, and that creates the borders of the Cold War. Well, Gehlen's network is still active in those Soviet territories. The Allies, so the U.S., for example, they weren't able to get those networks in place because they were never fighting in Eastern Europe.
Mm-hmm.
So Gehlen had a pretty important piece of leverage with the Allies, where he had this very, very intricate network of informants and of moles in these Eastern territories that the early CIA had very little visibility into otherwise.
And so Gehlen was a smart man, and he saw and understood that the entrance of the United States into World War II and their alliance with the Soviet Union would more or less doom the Nazis. And so through back channels, he reached out to, I believe it was, which Dulles brother was it?
That would have been Allen Dulles. Yeah.
Allen Dulles.
So Allen Dulles being one of the top OSS agents, OSS being the wartime spy agency of the United States that pretty directly turns into the CIA. A couple of little hiccups there, but it does pretty much become the CIA later. Allen Dulles being one of the most significant agents, especially in terms of getting intelligence out of Nazi Germany. He's based for most of the war in Switzerland. So Galen somehow gets in touch with Allen Dulles and basically says, hey, I have all of these microfilms, but I've buried them in a secret location. So microfilms, a bunch of intelligence on the Soviets. He says, if you can guarantee my amnesty from the future war crimes trials and my rehabilitation in a new German society, I'm happy to work for you and your future spy agency.
Yes, and this is kind of like the Christoph Waltz Inglourious Bastards element of it in my mind.
Exactly,
yeah.
Exactly. And it's this sort of Faustian bargain that sits at the sort of root of the post-war European security environment. I mean, as soon as Dulles starts making these deals with these ex-Nazis, I mean, it's open season. I mean, if you look at the West German state, especially right after World War II, it's a lot of Nazis, especially in bureaucratic roles. I mean, it's just the way it is. A lot of these men were the ones that were the bureaucrats at the time, and they were brought in. I'm not saying that I support that decision at all, but this is what the Allies did. They placed all these people in positions of power, and business continued as usual. What I will say is this. The Allies at least tried, and I will give them this, that Nuremberg was not perfect, but they at least tried in Germany some form of denazification. Even if it was the mildest thing, they still tried. The Soviets, of course, took it much more seriously on their end, but the Allies did. Maybe it was all bullshit, but they at least tried to show that. In Japan, no such thing. They didn't even try to cleanse that element in society. I'm doing a lot of research on that now. They didn't even try. If you look at Japanese society before 1945 and after, very little had changed. So it's
the Japanese have really gotten away with it post World War II. Maybe we felt like they served some penance by getting 2 nukes dropped on them. But, when people do the calculations for victims of communism, or even when people do calculations of victims of capitalism, very infrequently do people include the Japanese Empire and the many scores of millions of people that they brutally murdered.
Yeah, they skirted by with very, very little historic or sort of punishment. They barely got punished for any of their war crimes during World War II. And anyways, that's off topic. Let's zeroing. I just find this very interesting.
It's all very fascinating and very upsetting. Learning that Allen Dulles is quite possibly one of the most evil figures of the 20th century it shouldn't be too surprising. But like the more you learn about him, he is pernicious, man. He is particularly evil.
Oh, he was an absolute cretin, like just absolute. I don't use this word lightly, but I think he was seriously a psychopath in terms of just having zero sort of empathy for anyone and always having a very singular vision on his mission. Almost a perfect spy. If psychopaths make great spies.
Yeah.
But anyways, the reason of all this with Reinhard Gehlen is that. Gehlen and Dulles, Gehlen and the CIA later. So the CIA is created in 1947, and one of the first operations that the CIA undertakes is in collaboration with Gehlen. And Gehlen was rehabilitated entirely. He actually becomes the formal intelligence chief of West Germany under what is called the Gehlen Org, and then later becomes the BND, which to this day remains the German state's intelligence apparatus. So interesting there. Reinhard Gehlen, he's in charge of this thing called the Gehlen Org. In the immediate post-war years, he's running this program. This is somewhat rumored, It's based mostly on rumors, but there are reports of this, that he was running this operation where he had hired so-called werewolves that were these former Wehrmacht soldiers, for example, low level, that would go around in the streets and kill labor organizers in the night. They would sort of like werewolves, come and kill people. So this is sort of what the rumors are that was going on right during that post-war period when everything was still very chaotic. But things got more official in 1947 with the CIA. What happened is they wanted to create a so-called stay-behind. So stay-behinds are nothing new. An invading army will create cells within an occupied territory. In the event that the enemy decides to push forward into that lightly defended occupied territory, these so-called stay-behind cells become activated after they're taken over. And then they can put up resistance, and you have a pre-built resistance network within the country you just took, right? This has been happening throughout history in conflicts. The creation of this stay-behind organization was a collaboration between the CIA and Reinhard Gehlen. And Gehlen starts creating the outlines of the first, what we could call proto-Gladio network. Because, spoiler, these stay-behind networks become the networks in Gladio later. So what's happening here is that Gehlen is hiring, mostly like ex-Nazis, organized crime types, thugs, unemployed soldiers. This type of piece of the population, or this demographic, is being brought into these stay-behind networks in West Germany, but also this is happening in Italy as well. So the creation of these stay-behind networks would eventually evolve into Gladio, but it's not completely linear. There were other operations as well where the CIA was actually trying to implant cells beyond the Iron Curtain. And this is actually very interesting as well. This one I actually talked about in a Patreon exclusive video. So you're going to get a bit of behind the scenes of what's coming later on YouTube. So there was an operation in, I believe, 1948 or 49 called Operation Bloodstone. They really cooked with that name, by the way. Usually when the CIA comes up with a name, it's like, Operation Artichoke or some shit, like lame stuff. But Operation Bloodstone, I mean, that has some real, I don't know, some real juice. Anyways, the idea was that they were trying to put stay-behind cells, not really stay-behind in this case, but trying to infiltrate cells behind the Iron Curtain, mostly in Czechoslovakia, in Poland, some of the more volatile Soviet republics or Warsaw Pact members, we'll say. So they were trying to implant these cells to then create insurgent movements within those countries, and also to put in, for example, a big part of Gladio being these weapons caches, right? Like hiding guns. So they would have people parachute behind the Iron Curtain with, let's say, a rucksack full of weapons and bombs. They would go bury those bombs, and then they would be able to, because usually these were like Eastern European refugees, so they would be able to then reintegrate into that society and start resistance movements within beyond the Iron Curtain. So this is like an offensive Gladio project. Well, this gets very, very interesting, because what the CIA and Army intelligence soon discovered is that this is not the easiest thing to do with, especially with Eastern European refugees that were not exactly battle-trained commandos, right? I mean, these are people that are coming across the Iron Curtain. A lot of them are very hungry, destitute. Like these are not your Navy SEAL types, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they decide to create a commando school at this town called Oberammergau in southern Germany in the Bavarian Alps. And they create this whole commando school where people train to do these sort of parachuting missions beyond the Iron Curtain. These commandos are made up of mostly former partisans behind the Iron Curtain. So these are Waffen SS members, so guys that were brought in by the Nazis to fight as resistance fighters and to round up communists and kill them behind the Iron Curtain. Think of, for example, Stepan Bandera of Ukraine. his type of organization, the OUN, right? Like that was one of many of these types of organizations. For example, in Romania, it was the legionaries. They saw themselves as these knights, and they allied with the Nazis. They were eventually purged, but for a time they were allied to the Nazis. It's these types, these types of pro-Nazi partisans that became refugees in the West. Well, wouldn't it have it, this program at Oberammergau would become the U.S. Green Berets.
Oh, my God.
So, yes.
Oh, Jesus
so,
Christ.
Not only was there the Oberammergau camp, but they created a second program at Fort Bragg in the United States. And they had these two teams training concurrently. And then eventually the American recruits were brought over to Oberammergau, and they kind of mixed in together. I remember a quote, for example, that one of the American recruits into the first classic Green Berets said it had a real, what did he say, Foreign Legion flair to it. A lot of people with accents who their English wasn't quite that good. Well, it turns out that this was the offensive Gladio program had become the Green Berets, and I find a fascinating history to that, because the Green Berets would go on to do some horrendous shit in Vietnam and beyond. But anyways, so you have that component of Gladio, but I guess refocusing here for a second.
Let's refocus and let's talk about where Gladio really began, which would be Italy.
Yeah, for sure. Italy was the country that was the most at risk of becoming, or of falling, or not falling, but of electing a communist government. The Communist Party of Italy, the PCI, was the second largest communist party in Europe outside of Russia. Massive rank and file base, especially in the industrialized North. These were the partisans of World War II. These were the people that were doing the brutal fighting in northern Italy that I don't think gets enough interest from World War II scholars. That fighting in northern Italy was some of the most brutal fighting of World War II. Anyways, these are the people that were able to organize northern Italy and create a real base for the Communist Party in the post-war years. Well, that was untenable, right? That was unacceptable to NATO, to the early NATO powers. This is still before NATO, but the Allied powers. So, first, it started with rigging an election in 1948. The communists were going to run away with it, but there was the Allies, or should I say the CIA, in one of their first operations employed mafia elements and just disparate thugs to try to manipulate the election there. And it was very close, but it did end up going to the Christian Democrats. So,
and I also want to emphasize the Vatican.
Yes.
The Catholic Church was instrumental in working with the mafia, the CIA, and former Nazis. And I find it so amusing that these modern trad-caths who hate the Vatican II so much or whatever long for the days of, is it Pope Pius II? Is that which one it is? I can't remember where he is.
Which one? The one who did this in Italy?
Yes.
Yeah, that would have been. Oh God, you're putting me on the spot here. Here, let me just check here.
I'll edit it, make us sound smart.
Yeah, make it sound like I've just got this off the top. It's Pius XII.
I knew there was a two. Pope Pius XII. The Vatican involvement is instrumental, not just because of their cultural cachet, but because of the Vatican Bank and the amount of money laundering that I think still goes on to this day, because there's zero oversight with all the cash that runs through them.
Correct. No, and I'm really happy you brought that up too, because there is I've heard some people say this, and I think that there is some truth to it, and it's actually a podcaster that I really respect and who actually inspired me to start my own show in a certain sense. It's Ghost Stories for the End of the World. He has a great series on Italian Gladio and other Gladio elements too. Like he has a great series on Belgium, which is some really top work. He says this. He says, people try to compare the endless string of mass shootings in the United States to a Gladio network. But he says that this is not a comparison that can be made, because Gladio is essentially European. It has that essential European quality in the sense, like you said, that it is very Catholic. The networks that fall behind this, behind Gladio, are extremely Catholic. It runs through the networks. It runs through all the people that orchestrate it, and then the Vatican, of course, sitting as the church on the hill that is likely doling out a lot of the cash alongside NATO, of course. The Vatican always remained a key player in all of this, and especially a funder, like you said. I mean, to this day, they're used for money laundering purposes just because it's so opaque. Especially that Vatican bank is so opaque; it makes it perfect for money laundering activities. Actually, interestingly, I also learned recently that the Vatican bank was used for the so-called Black Eagle Trust. At least those that profess this theory. I don't know if you've heard of this before, the Black Eagle Trust.
I have not.
So it's essentially this idea that like all the gold from World War II that was looted by the Axis, especially the Japanese, but this is a whole different scenario. The Black Eagle Trust is mainly used in terms of Nazi gold, that it was all put in this like secret trust account and dispersed into like different banks around the world, and it was used to fund covert operations and political programs throughout the world. And a key component of that is that a lot of this like sort of Nazi gold is hiding in the Vatican bank. That's anyways what they're saying. Yeah. It's, I mean, again, there's no smoking gun with this Black Eagle Trust stuff, and I'm always told by people to look into it, and there's just like it's all very like circumstantial, but it still makes for interesting headcanon, I guess. And I think there's crazier things.
If you're gonna if you're a betting man, if you're gonna bet on these things, it's like you're gonna put gold on gold here. Like it is.
Oh yeah.
It's far more likely. I think that's one of the things I had to learn early on when I got into conspiratorial thinking is you're never going to get a satisfying smoking gun on these things. And you just eventually, you just have to kind of almost like intuit that this is what it is, because it makes sense, more sense than the alternative.
You know, I think people like Gladio a lot right now because there is actually a smoking gun. I mean, Italian Prime Minister Giulio Andreotti came out in the 1990s and said that Operation Gladio was real and that stay-behinds were employed in these terror acts.
Right.
And to just kind of jump ahead a bit, right? Like the main crux of so-called Operation Gladio took place over the 1960s, the late 60s to the mid-80s, which is known as the Years of Lead in Italy. Where we're talking several mass death or several terror attacks happening in quick succession over that decade and a half, especially bombings. There's the Piazza Fontana bombing in Milan, and then, of course, the most famous and the most bloody being the Bologna massacre, where almost, I think it's 180 people died in a train station in Bologna because of a bomb. So, and the reason that this became such a contentious topic is because when you look at the people that were involved and that were pinned on these crimes, often, okay, so they were always radicals of some kind. They were either, communists or fascists, but they were often, and especially like this applies for the communists, they were often not the most ardent communists, we'll say. A lot of them started their careers as fascists, and the same goes with the fascists. A lot of those fascists started their careers as communists.
So like they're basically like Pol Pot style communists in a way.
In a sense, I mean, one, for example, I was reading about today, he was a Maoist fascist was the name of his ideology.
God, that sounds like someone who is online right now.
Exactly. I mean, it's total bullshit, right? To put it lightly. I mean, it's, the dumpster of ideology, right? If we want to go there. So it was just strange ideological tidings, and then of course there's behind all of these events there's multiple kind of red flags that point to intelligence agency involvement. And one figure, I mean, there's entire seasons of podcasts about this. This is not something that I'm going to be able to.
We're speed running this. This is very much 101. Yes, we have not enough time this month to possibly get into all the characters and events that are part of this.
Look, do your own research, folks. Do your own research. No, but seriously, I will highlight one person and one character if you want to start looking into this stuff before we move into the more juicy, domestic Gladio or domestic strategy attention stuff. It was this guy named Stefano Della Chie, which. What a name. I mean, only the Italians could come up with that. Good luck typing that out, too. It's a hell of a... Anyways, Stefano Della Chie was a fascist theorist in Italy, and he also fought with the fascist partisans in the Italian Social Republic. So at the end of World War II, when the Allies were starting to push northwards through Italy, they actually overthrew Mussolini's government and forced him into exile. And the Nazis created a puppet state in the north called the Italian Social Republic. And within that state, there were these fascist partisans that fought under that flag. And this guy, Della Chie, was one of those partisans. That's how he got his start.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, why don't people like that get executed after? I used to be very much against the death penalty, but now I'm like, nah, you gotta get rid of them. I'm not saying you gotta do it like Genghis Khan style, like where you just like wipe out entire civilizations, but you gotta get rid of a lot more than we did post World War II. That's for sure.
I mean, a lot of them miraculously escaped any justice. I mean, a lot of them didn't. I mean, we got to be real here that the partisans in northern Italy were brutal to most of the fascists they came across, right?
Mm-hmm.
Understandably. But Della Chie was able to escape justice. Interestingly, another one who escaped justice, and I talk about him in my video on the election, the Italian election in 1948, was a man named Junio Valerio Borghese, known as the Black Prince. And he was a naval officer in the Social Republic. In this, I don't think he was an officer, but it was more like special forces type. He was in this. It was like a proto Navy SEALs unit called Decima Mas, X Mas, and he X being 10 here, Decima 10. Anyways, he was part of this Navy SEAL squadron, but he was also like a minor aristocrat. Anyways, after the war in the 1970s, I believe, Borghese, who was saved by James Jesus Angleton of the CIA after the war, teams up with Della Chie to try to do a coup d'etat in Italy to put him in as, I think he wants to be the king of Italy, actually, is the goal. This fails miserably. It's known as the Borghese coup in Italy. It's a bit of a farce compared to some of the more brutal events of the years of lead, but it's just one piece of this puzzle. Della Chie eventually gets exiled from Italy, and he ends up in, of all places, Francoist Spain. This is where all these sort of wanted Gladio fugitives end up. Spain, during the Cold War, became a real refuge for international fascist figures.
So, to rewind one more second, let's so the Christian Democrats steal the election in 1948, which was projected to have a significant communist victory for the PCI.
Right.
What I do love is that even if the PCI won, an American was it the Navy? He drew up plans to invade Italy if the PCI won.
That's right. Yeah, they had contingency plans if, yeah.
Yeah, so communism just never really stood a chance in the 20th century for a number of reasons, it seems.
Well, and not to mention, I've never really talked about this, but Stalin's foreign policy post-World War II was an absolute disaster. I mean, he didn't stand up for the communists in Greece. He allowed Italy to go without much of any. Apparently, there was almost no Soviet meddling, other than broad popular support for the PCI party. There was no such thing as what the CIA was up to in Italy. He just allowed he allowed a lot of prospective communist governments to fall that would have been easy layups to win, especially in Greece. That's the big one. And I mean, I'm talking just purely geopolitically here. It's an absolute failure of a foreign policy. He didn't have the juice after the war.
Why was that? I've heard that it's because the bureaucrats in post World War II Soviet Union weren't interested in like potentially fighting another war. But also, is that what happens when you purge Trotsky? There's no interest in an international movement?
Maybe. I mean, I'm not an expert on Sovietology at all. Like I have really come to the conclusion that his foreign policy was terrible, especially not backing Tito. Tito wanted to support the Greek communists, and Stalin told him not to. And this is where the Tito-Soviet split really starts to foment. It's interesting. I think that you might be onto something with his sort of socialism in one country concept. I think that also the Soviet Union, the people of the Soviet Union were exhausted from one of the most brutal conflicts in human history, and they took the brunt of it. And also, I mean, I think you could just simply say that, I mean, he had a lot on his plate. I mean, there were all these new republics that he had to keep in check. I mean, Poland, Czechoslovakia, the Balkan, or the Baltics were already part of the Soviet Union, but like Hungary, all these new countries that were under the Warsaw Pact now. I mean, that was a lot to already have to keep in line, especially with meddling from the CIA in that sense later.
And I might be stretching here because what do I know? But considering the past year or two with Israel and Gaza and what happens when you don't stop fascism in its tracks, it creeps to you eventually. I mean, the fact that Hezbollah fell as quickly as it did, and then Syria and Iran has to belatedly get involved in the game instead of like attacking then and there. It seems like you can't wait for it. This containment isolationist policy doesn't fare well against fascism.
No, I mean, you could also then take the inverse view that what we're seeing right now is fascism like cannibalizing itself in a sense, like with this desperation attack on Iran. I mean, it's seeming like the Israeli state sees themselves in a place where if there is not continuous conflict and continuous injection of U.S. funds and support, that the state might collapse on its own contradictions, which I'm of two minds of. I do actually think that the Israeli state might be a paper tiger, and that it might be necessary for it to be in this constant state of war and constant injection of endless funds for it to even stand a chance of surviving. Like, look at the Nazis, for example, right? I mean, once they started invading their conquests, they didn't stop. They didn't stop because the war machine started to. I mean, you look at the Israeli economy; it's kind of the same way. It's so heavily leveraged on their defense sector that they need it to continue. And this is largely what happened in Nazi Germany as well.
And then they have to dress it up with some sort of esoteric, spiritual, eschatology or whatever in order to defend it. So that's where what I was saying, like true believers, like it's all business is in the end. There's no actual faith. The faith comes after the business plan.
I mean, man, like I at the bottom of everything, I mean, I see kind of the military-industrial complex as being the most significant force in modern human history, beyond all the ideology and all that stuff. It's really the endless drive for profits through the military sector.
But we digress. Let's get back to Italy post-1948. What happens next?
Yeah, so, I mean, Italy is held under control by NATO. I mean, NATO happens in, again, I might be wrong on this. This is off the top of my head. I think 1951, I believe. It might be 49. Anyways, it forms somewhere in there, and Italy is an initial signatory partner in NATO and becomes a member from out of the get-go. This would obviously not happen if the PCI had won, so it was kind of an essential piece. And then from there, it's just the Communist Party kind of bubbling there on in the margins, preparing for another electoral win, and that really starts to look probable in the early 60s. A lot is happening in the early 60s. And a piece of all this that a lot of people miss is the Algerian independence war against the French. In this war, and I mean, I've read a lot about it recently because I do hope to make some videos about it. But the most important element is that in Algeria there were two major coup attempts against President Charles de Gaulle by rogue army officers in Algeria that did not support his policy, because Charles de Gaulle's policy largely evolved throughout the war to get to a point where he was starting to support independence for an Algerian state. These rogue army generals in Algeria, of course, were fighting to keep Algeria a part of France. So they tried to coup de Gaulle to create an independent French-run state of Algeria under a military government. And the name of this organization was the Organisation d'Armée Secrète, which translates to the Secret Army Organization, the OAS.
Very subtle name.
Yeah, easy, right? Yeah, we'll call it the Secret Army Organization. Done. All right, next item.
Yeah.
But these guys, they get crushed by the French pretty easily. I mean, they get pretty close to overthrowing Charles de Gaulle. They actually pull off an assassination attempt that fails.
As documented in Day of the Jackal, loosely.
Yep, loosely based on that.
Great movie, must watch.
Great book too.
It's a book?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
I should have said they made a book off of the movie.
Yeah, it's the movie book. Yeah. You know when they write the book based on the movie, like that stupid Tarantino shit where he wrote a book based on Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Yep. Okay, let's keep going.
Anyways, so these OAS guys, they get taken out of Algeria, and a lot of them run away to, of course, Franco's Spain, where all these figures end up.
I bet you they're fucking Real Madrid fans too, by the way. They're all so, just so you know.
Look, I have no horse in that race at all. But they probably are. I mean, they all ended up in Madrid and in Portugal as well at the same time. They were both under military dictatorships at the time with Franco and Salazar. So a lot of these fascist guys that get kicked out of their countries, they end up going there because there was a lot of there was a bustling underground there of guys that were fomenting these sort of terror acts throughout Europe. Delachille ends up in Portugal eventually, and he founds this organization called Aginter Press, which is like a sort of fake press office that is actually a mercenary training organization. And it ends up training a lot of the security forces for the Argentinian junta in South America in the 70s during the Dirty War. So nasty parallels here. We're getting to the point here, I promise. So these OAS guys, okay, they start spreading all over Europe and even North America, just looking for places to fight against communism, basically. They end up in, some of these guys end up in Rhodesia. Some of these guys end up in West Africa. Some of these guys even end up in Vietnam. But one of them actually ends up in New Orleans, where he ends up hanging out with a bunch of Cuban exiles in the office of one Guy Bannister. Guy Bannister being an ex-FBI agent, ex-police chief of New Orleans, and a good pal of David Ferry and Lee Harvey Oswald. The man who ends up there, this OAS soldier, his name is Jean-René Souetre. He goes by many different names. He was a sharpshooter in the OAS and in the French army. And he ends up in New Orleans. And on the day of JFK's death, Jean Souetre is arrested by police in Dallas. Based on his extradition records, or the records of him getting sent home, we know that he was picked up by police in Dallas on November 22nd, 1963. So this is just one little look at the Gladio implications of on the JFK assassination. It goes far beyond that, but this is a fun little aside. But OAS, a lot of these guys end up being international mercenaries, but also Delachier out of Portugal ends up planning a bunch of bombings in Italy. Most notably, the Piazza Fontana bombing in Milan is directly attributed to him, while other ones are suspected. He's not the only one by far. There's a ton of these guys doing this. And Agent der Presse, of course, his mercenary organization, is funded by the CIA. Now, this is all happening during the years of lead, but there's really a key component to all this in Italy itself. And this is a Masonic lodge called Propaganda Due, P2 for short. P2, the membership list of P2 leaked after the years of lead and showed many prominent Italian politicians, security personnel, mafia members, and bankers. And it was in this sort of milieu that the Gladio underground really spread out from. It's, again, I don't get too hung up on the whole Masonic angle. I think that a lot of people love to point that out as this being some sort of secret Masonic plot. I think that they were using the Masonic Hall because it was a secret forum. These guys were much more, if anything, they were much more loyal to the Vatican and the Catholic Church than they were to some sort of Masonic lodge, in my opinion. But nonetheless, it's very interesting. And the main guy, Licio Gelli, the master of the Masonic lodge, was actually at Ronald Reagan's inauguration, which is kind of funny. So, I mean, this is kind of the very broad strokes of Italian Gladio. Mm-hmm. If we want to apply it to the American setting, we could try to jump to that.
Well, I want to at least let people understand what else Gladio touches in Europe during this period. The French Connection, which is now a famous movie, is an element of Operation Gladio, correct?
Yeah. So this is So this comes out of Paul L. Williams' book on Operation Gladio. I think it's a fine book to get into the topic, but I think that he bites off way more than he can chew, and I also think that he ties in some elements that are, I don't think, necessarily involved. And I think that you can tie some tangential links between the French Connection and Gladio, but do I think they're part of the same organization? Probably not. The main link between the two would be through Michele Sindona, I believe. Anyways, he was an Italian banker and mafia guy who also was a fascist during World War II. And he was he claimed to be the banker for Meyer Lansky in Italy. And he worked closely with mafia figures during the invasion of Sicily by the U.S. Army in 1943. So you can tie that through because Sindona was part of P2. He was thought to be the one that funded a lot of these Gladio operations. He also owned a bank in, I believe, upstate New York called the Franklin Bank. Anyways, it's a strange thing, and that's actually how he gets caught. And he was close with Nixon as well. It's a whole mess. And
it does. But so other events in Europe during this period of time that people might have a hint of, or it's a reference to that I don't realize that this falls under the umbrella of Operation Gladio?
Yeah, so like the other big one is Belgium. I mean, Belgium, this was happening right at the end of the Cold War in the late 80s, early 90s. You can obviously imagine, Brussels being a key center, being the headquarters of NATO, right? So you're so close to the center, and there were several widely publicized massacres. The big one being the Brabant killings. Brabant being one of the provinces of Belgium. Brutal massacres by masked men in grocery stores and just civilians getting gunned down. And this gets very, very sick because it's happening at the same time that there's another scandal in Belgium called the Dutroux affair. Dutroux was essentially, you can think of him as the Belgian Epstein. He ran this sort of honeypot sexual blackmail ring, allegedly, I'll say, but it's pretty obvious what he was doing. He was close to the Belgian elite and many members of NATO in Belgium, Belgians, and
he openly said as much, correct?
Yeah, he was quite frank about it. And he was, because, again, you should go listen to Ghost Stories for the End of the World's series on this. He does a much better job than what I'm going to do here in this very
he also does it over like 10 hours of episodes. So
he is one of the most thorough, incredibly thorough.
Yeah, he's great.
And he also works with this guy, Nick, who is himself Belgian. So he has like a very good perspective of the society that all this was going on in. But that said, from what I remember, Belgium has always had this sort of like sick, like elite history of like sex parties and like political blackmail. And like Dutroux kind of just like inserted himself into this pre-existing fabric and became kind of the new dawn of all this. But like the thing with Dutroux is that like this is involving, you know, like very, very like young children. Like it's some sick shit.
It's really sick, and there's like more murder involved in it than the Epstein stuff too.
Yeah, like a lot of these children came up like dead, and a lot of them were actually like buried in his yard and in the walls of his house. Like it's some nasty shit.
It's like it's nightmarish shit.
It really is. Yeah.
Yeah, not for the faint of heart.
Not at all. Not at all. So all this was happening in Belgium, and this is, you know, while the end of the Cold War was happening, and while people were starting to question the need for NATO, right? Why do we still need NATO if the Cold War is over, right? Because NATO was there to combat the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union collapsed. Why do we still need it? Well, all of this was happening at that same time. People have extrapolated this to believe that it was to create a new security crisis through all the mass killings, and B, and just a sort of a general sort of atmosphere of malaise, and B, to blackmail sort of oppositional politicians to continue to allow NATO to be headquartered in Belgium in memoriam, and it's still there. So, you know, I don't know if you can draw a direct link there, but there it is.
Yeah.
So yeah, those are the two most famous ones, Belgium and Italy. There's also Turkey. Don't ask me about Turkey. There's very few sources in English. There's a very dense literature in Turkish that is, but that's a whole can of worms. It's incredibly complex. I don't.
So I think what people would want to know then is that what did effectively these things do during this period of time? What did they accomplish?
So I guess it would be quite simply put, security states started to understand the usefulness. I mean, this has always been known, but I think it was maybe more, it was kind of cranked up to 11 with Gladio, understanding that having constant crisis after crisis and constant trauma, what does consistent trauma do to a population? It traumatizes them and makes the people more open to severe measures, right? Draconian measures. So how would we extrapolate that? I'm going to say that it in a sense, Gladio and the strategy of tension, more importantly, gave a blueprint for the creation of a true false flag culture, in the sense that you're creating crisis after crisis, one, to distract, and two, to scare and to traumatize, to be able to have a stronger control of said society, and to demonize certain groups, to further divide, and then in the background, you know, the ruling class can do as they wish with more ease.
And if it ain't broke, don't fix it. It seems that this is a very effective method of control. And even though it was the Soviet Union's gone, why would they stop using this tactic?
Right, and I would make the argument that it's Americans, the American people, or the Americans in charge of what we would call a domestic Gladio, learned from the Europeans. I do think that the Europeans did teach them some things. There's a lot of evidence actually of American generals and American spooks going over to Italy and Europe during the years of lead and meeting with a lot of these figures at conferences and where these concepts were developed. Specifically, a figure that I'm quite obsessed with, Charles Willoughby, General Charles Willoughby, who was an intelligence general. He was the head of Army intelligence, so all intelligence essentially, in the Pacific during World War II, the occupation of Japan, and the beginning of the Korean War. He had a lot of ties with Europe and a lot of ties with Franco's Spain as well. And he was going over there a lot and learning from them essentially the tactics that they employed in this so-called strategy of tension, but also how to set up Gladio undergrounds. There's a lot of very compelling evidence to that fact. There's also a case where one of these Gladio figures, I can't remember his name right now, Gianetti actually, or Gianettini, I believe is his name, and he was instrumental in the Piazza Fontana bombing. He actually, it's an uncredited claim that he came to Annapolis, Maryland at the Naval Academy in 1962 on the invitation of a retired Marine General Del Valle to give a speech on quote-unquote potentials of a coup d'etat in the United States. He was giving the speech to CIA, DOD, and Navy officials. So that's an uncredited source, but it is in several books, and it's been repeated a lot in European press. So
Now, we call it domestic Gladio the same way we call it, I guess, Canadian bacon or whatever, and that I guess that means that, like, yes, it's American Gladio is what domestic Gladio means. What would you say, like, the first example of domestic Gladio would be?
Yeah, so I would say, I can actually. And I haven't made all the videos yet, so I don't have my full sort of thesis out there yet. But I could conceivably place the JFK assassination as a potential false flag, failed false flag, but a false flag nonetheless. I think that there were certain military intelligence figures, Charles Willoughby being included, that knew that the JFK assassination was going to happen and were trying to weaponize it in order to blame it on the Soviets so that they could go to war against them.
Interesting. I guess they had a couple of opportunities or who to blame, but Castro or the Soviets.
Exactly, and I think that their main target was the Soviets. And if you think about the same time as this, in 1962-63, JFK was being proposed a new policy position in Cuba called Operation Northwoods. Well, right. Operation Northwoods involved false attacks on U.S. Army installations by quote-unquote Cuban assets in order to precipitate a full-on shooting war with Cuba. Of course, he declined this insane proposal, but it was proposed by the U.S. Army.
And funny enough, it was, I think, heralded by his brother RFK. I think RFK was the one kind of pushing for it initially.
RFK was much more of a hawk than JFK was, especially in the early days against Cuba.
But after his brother was killed, I think he changed his tune, and then they MK Ultra'd Sirhan and got him to do another instance of domestic Gladio, if we're going to speculate here.
Yeah, it very well could be. It very well could be.
So, that's interesting. That makes sense, because I think that, like, conspiracies, false flags, they do fall under this umbrella, this thing that was done. So it is interesting that it took 15 years then for Gladio to reach America.
So not quite in that sense, because the strategy of tension is only really formalized on paper if we're going to believe that this is an authentic document in 1965. Before that, this was all just things that people were doing, right? There was nothing written down. There were some sort of rudimentary ones. There was one found in France called the Blue Plan, where they planned on overthrowing the French government using sort of terror attacks to create a sense of crisis. But it wasn't called the strategy of tension yet. Like these theories only really became official in the mid-60s, about the same time that Willoughby was going over and that Northwoods was being presented to the president. So it's all kind of happening simultaneously, but I don't think that the election in Italy is really any sort of strategy of tension. I think that's just dirty tricks and sort of paving the way for Gladio.
So Gladio then reached its peak, or really got it into fifth gear in the 60s.
That's correct. Yeah, over the years of lead, 60s to early 80s, early to mid 80s.
So in domestic Gladio, we have JFK, the JFK assassination. It's interesting to think of it as a failed attempt because it seemed to accomplish kind of. It seems like they just can't lose. The deep state can't lose. Like whatever happens, so long as some sort of awful chaos ensues, they win.
Yeah, surely. I mean, they got Vietnam as another prize, which, I mean, that was good enough, I guess. I think that the faction that was actually trying to create this war with the Soviet Union was quite small and marginal, right? I don't think that these were the people that were like Willoughby by this point was retired, and most of his agents were all out of the army. These were these were all people on the fringes. I mean, these were people on the radical right of the Overton window.
Curtis LeMay type figures.
Yes, even to the right of Curtis LeMay.
More right than Curtis LeMay? How is that possible?
Like Edwin Walker, General Edwin Walker, who allegedly got shot at by Oswald 3 months before he shoots Kennedy, allegedly shoots Kennedy. Edwin Walker had been dismissed by Kennedy from his post in West Germany because he was passing out literature of written by the Liberty Lobby, which was this extreme rightist organization.
So let's talk about some other instances of domestic Gladio, just to give people the understanding that it's often and big.
Yeah, let me give you another perspective. And I'll start with Charles Willoughby again, because he's really on my mind right now, but also it does lead into some really interesting places. In the mid-'60s, a book is published called The Franklin Letters. It is a sort of fake autobiography, but also part survivalist guide, militia, guerrilla, warrior, urban fighting guide, etc. Where it views that it states that there's an inevitable race war coming. You need to grab your weapons and fight and form militias, white militias to defend the white races, etc. Right. Well, it turns out that Charles Willoughby funded the publishing of this book. The Franklin Letters ends up in the hands of William Luther Pierce, who is this sort of we could call him a fascist ideologue, who ends up writing the Turner Diaries, inspired by the Franklin Letters.
That Franklin Letters sounds so much like the Turner Diaries.
Yes. So he's inspired by the Franklin Letters to write the Turner Diaries. The Turner Diaries, in essence, are a field guide for the white radical militiaman to be able to fight in the race war. And this book, The Turner Diaries, has inspired many, many sort of quote-unquote lone wolf American terrorists, most famously McVeigh, right, with Timothy McVeigh, the OKC bomber. Now,
I was also going to say, before we get into the 90s, I mean, do the Manson murders fall under domestic Gladio, speculatively?
Yeah, I mean, they could. They definitely could. I mean, the Manson stuff is such a mess. It's, you can go the MK Ultra route. You can go the sort of process church route with the whole satanic angle, that he was groomed by these satanic, this satanic cult called The Process. A great series on it, a great podcast series about that right now that I've been listening to by Twitter user Dana Duda. If you have the chance to listen, it's fantastic. Manson, I mean, it achieved much of the same result that a strategy of tension would, right? I mean, the trauma was definitely there on American society. It essentially ended the idealistic 60s and the counter, if there even ever was a real counterculture movement. It kind of ended it in its tracks. and it allowed for greater police presence in the greater LA area on the West Coast. So yeah, I mean, you could definitely fit it in that mold. I just don't know. I think I just wonder, is it missing the sort of military intel angle, which it does have that CIA angle. So I don't know. And of course, Dr. Jolyon West, right, the one who meets up with what's his name, with Manson, with Manson many times, and feeds him LSD. He ends up meeting Timothy McVeigh 30 years later in the 90s while he's in his prison cell, right? So I mean, it's it's just too easy. It's just too easy.
He wasn't the same guy that met with Ruby after.
Oh, of course it is. Yes,
it is.
Yeah.
Like, how can you not see? How can you not learn this and just go absolutely fucking insane? Like, when you see this, it's just out there. I don't know. When you real sorry. Okay. I just like stuff like that just makes my brain fucking want to jump out of my fucking skull.
Totally. And I mean, the McVeigh and Jolyon West connection, that's all Wendy painting in her book Aberration in the Heartland of the Real. Read it. It's I mean, it's a real book stop of a book. It's a giant tome. But if you can even just get through the first half, there's enough nuggets in there to keep you going for the rest of your life.
Okay, so we go. Should we skip to OKC? I mean, is that the next big domestic Gladio event in American history?
I mean, we could talk about the militia movement in general, right? I mean, this is kind of what I see as the sort of the foot soldiers of the domestic Gladio program, right? I mean, a lot of people, peg the militia movement as starting in like the late 80s, early 90s, end of the Reagan era, right? Where it becomes very famous, right? With the three major events. Well, two major events with the militia movement, but I really put these three together, and a lot of authors do, right? You have Waco, Ruby Ridge, OKC, right? Those become kind of American mythology, but they're also can all be seen as sort of the deployment of this domestic Gladio program. The militia movement did not start there, though. It actually started, I would argue, in the late 50s, early 60s, with a group called the Minutemen, who were this sort of ragtag group of anti-communist kind of militia types, who they met up, apparently the mythologies, they met on a hunting trip, and they decided to form a militia together, and it grew to be only about 3,000 members at its peak, give or take. It was founded by this man named Depew, who ran his own, this is really strange, he ran his own independent animal pharmaceutical company out of, I believe, Missouri, rural Missouri. It's strange. I've tried to find something, I've tried to find some dirt on it, but there's just like really nothing. It's just so strange. Anyways, the Minutemen end up popping up in very strange places. For one, Guy Bannister, that man who met with the OAS guy.
They can't stop reappearing.
Yeah, he was the Minutemen chief in Louisiana. In New Orleans, should I say. So he was hooked into that, and there was a whole element there that the Minutemen network were really similar to the Gladio network, in my opinion, because they were really in on the weapons cache thing, where they would bury weapons everywhere. They had all these like weapons stashed all over the United States that could be accessed if there was a so-called whatever kind of war or insurgency or whatever, right? So Guy Bannister was using these Minutemen guys to procure guns for his Cuban exiles and maybe even OAS Captain Sweat. Who knows? Right. And they were doing this across the United States, burying weapons, whatever else. Right. And it evolves from there. It starts to quiet down a little bit, but it really picks up again with the 80s and 90s. And everybody knows about this, the militia movement in the 80s and 90s and everything that surrounds that, really surrounding the Gulf War as sort of the central event there. And after Waco, it really picks up.
We have the militiamen, the OKC bombing. I guess the next big one is 9/11, right? I mean, that's the most evident one. I think that's the one that, besides JFK, most people would see as, they would call it a false flag, of course, but does that qualify as a domestic Gladio event?
I mean, I don't know.
Is that one just like too big to chew on? You know, like are Gladio events more contained and less international than something like 9/11?
Well, here's the thing, right? So a lot of people say that Operation Gladio ended in the late 80s, and then it was replaced by something called Gladio B, which there is some actually circumstantial, well, not even circumstantial, but there is a eyewitness testimony of these documents existing about Gladio B from certain whistleblowers. I'm not going to speak to the veracity or the if they are true or not. Again, do your own research, folks. You know, look at what these claims are and take them with whatever credence you want. But essentially what it posits is that after the end of the Cold War, a new enemy was needed by the security state because there was no more real communist threat. So they switched from the communist threat to the sort of Islamic terrorism threat, the global war on terror. To precipitate this threat, they needed to stage terror events across the world to create this environment where you could, for example, invade Iraq and Afghanistan, right? 9/11 being the sort of the pinnacle of all that, but before that, there was a lot of events that people tend to forget that were starting to create the collective imagination of the Islamic terrorist. One being all the Al-Qaeda fighters in Bosnia during the Balkan Wars. A lot of
how'd they get there?
Right? Yeah, I mean, I guess they just walked, right?
How did ISIS get into Xinjiang? How did that happen? You know?
Yeah, I don't know. They took a bike. I don't know, like they're tandem bikes.
They took a Waymo.
Anyway, so yeah, they were there. Also like just all over the place, like the Caucasus. There was a big sort of like a terror threat there with Azerbaijan becoming independent. A lot of people forget about this. That there were like Al Qaeda guys there, and a lot of these guys trained in Afghanistan, where Osama bin Laden was conspicuously there. And of course, a lot of people believe, and maybe I believe, that Osama bin Laden was maybe a CIA asset. So it's like you start to see like where this is going, and then also the last one is in Dagestan, like in the name is escaping me. In Russia, the Muslim Chechnya, yes, thank you. Yeah, in Chechnya there was of course a lot of terror in the late 90s. This is early Putin era when he's dealing with all that, and there's the repression of the Chechen people because of all these radicals coming in across the border and starting all this shit.
Back when what was it? Bush said he looked into Putin's eyes and saw a good man. Back when Putin was on like better terms with us, you mean?
Back when Putin was a good guy, yeah, that was not that long ago either. Yeah. It's kind of crazy. And then of course the embassy attacks in East Africa, in Kenya,
leading up to 9/11.
Leading up to 9/11, I mean, you, all of these strings of attacks where this group Al Qaeda just pops out of nowhere as soon as the Soviet Union falls, and these fighters seem to be, or these militants seem to be bussed in by the dozens wherever there's a conflict.
Mm-hmm.
It's very strange. But anyways, that's the sort of the theory behind Gladio B. So if you want to take that model and then apply 9/11 as kind of the coup de grace, you could, I guess.
I guess the other strategy of tension, and this is a program to kill McGowan sort of style Gladio, is that serial killers and subsequently like school shootings are also could potentially fall under that purview of strategy of tension, although I find those to be a bit more of a stretch than the other events.
People might not like this, but I'm not really like that big of a strategy or a program to kill head. Like I've read the book. I think it's quite good. I don't know if I'm really sold on the whole concept. I think that there's definitely forces at work with certain serial killers. I'll point to Richard Ramirez being one that I find very fascinating. Being shown, or Richard Ramirez, when he was a kid, his cousin was a member of the Phoenix program in Vietnam, which, if you don't know what the Phoenix program is, it was a search and destroy, assassination, rural pacification program with nightmarish implications. This was run by the CIA in consultation with the Department of Defense, the South Vietnamese Army, and the police. It was a massive police organization or police operation as well. Anyway, so Richard Ramirez, being the Night Stalker killer in L.A., his cousin was one of these. He was probably a psychopath, and he was one of these operators in the Phoenix program. And when he comes back from the war, he shows an 11-year-old Richard Ramirez photos of bodies that he mutilated and of Vietnamese people that he raped, Polaroids. Showing them to him, traumatizing him as a young child.
Which, I find the Program to Kill thesis compelling, but as someone who's done a fair amount of psychedelics, it's very unpredictable. It just doesn't seem like as tenable. The mind control stuff has always seemed kind of like possible to me, but difficult to hold, to control.
I don't find it difficult to imagine that a lot of serial killers had traumatic childhoods, and that made them more predisposed to becoming serial killers.
Mm-hmm.
The place that I struggle with is that there is a government program, as loose as it might be, to weaponize these forces. I find difficult to wrap my head around.
So, what then is the 21st century Gladio that I think everyone speculates on today? Because the basis of this conversation is also not just that, they're going to use some sort of Gladio strategy of tension type event to get us involved into war with Iran, even though apparently that seems totally unnecessary now. We can just go to Iran without some sort of violent event that gets everybody all hot and bothered. We're just going to war now without false flags.
Yeah, I mean, all eyes on the Nimitz, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I try to be a little bit skeptical when I see some kind of event, and I think a lot of people in our community, in the parapolitical community, see any sort of violent event and are immediately think false flag or Gladio strategy of tension. I think even people saw the Luigi Mangione assassination as some kind of Gladio type. It feels like it can be so loosely interpreted now. And the assassinations in Minnesota, Kalani, our friend of the pod, friend of both of our pods, Kalani Gosh has been following the Minnesota assassination very closely and has definitely picked apart some of the very bizarre elements of this assassination as the events unfold. And so we have to wonder, does this fall under the purview of domestic Gladio?
Yeah, I mean, I think also of all that shit with the Monkey Morales' kid as well recently that you and Kalani covered. I mean, it's all these strange, it seems like every time there's an event, and I don't know if this is I'll get back to this point, but every time there's an event that there seems to be very obvious interlinks with either intelligence or the military apparatus more broadly in regards to the perpetrator, right? Now, this is where we have to ask the sort of key question, where I ask myself all the time. Are we noticing these things because we're looking for them, or are they actually important? Right? We're all steeped in this shit. I pore over sources and read old newspaper articles and look at every word that's been written on certain people. As a hobby, I've been doing this now for almost 3.5 years.
Mm-hmm.
And you start to notice patterns, you start to recognize names and whatever else. you can take any event in human history and find parapolitical implications. Do they actually matter? Are they actually significant every time? Probably not. Probably not. But you have to wonder, is this kind of the point? Is part of this false flag culture to create a sense of just omnipresent paranoia, right? And I don't want to chalk it all.
Are we doing the work for them? In other words,
exactly. That's very well put. I don't want to chalk it all up to paranoia. I think there's some very compelling cases made about almost all of these events, these parapolitical events. But at the same time, we have to continue to check ourselves and wonder, is this? Are we just looking for things to make this event sus, or is it really sus? Yeah. That's the.
I think in the instance of this Vance Bolter guy, the Minnesota assassin, to me, he seems like an unstable individual. I think that the evidence that he was inspired to do violence is compelling to me, and that all of the rabid anti-abortion activists who I see every week when I drive by the local Planned Parenthood, these people who are willing to stand out in the heat. I can imagine more extreme versions of this kind of response to people who think that there's a daily Holocaust going on, that young children are being murdered. And when you create this culture of demonic opponents, of course people are going to become radicalized and commit acts of violence. So it doesn't seem like that outrageous to me that this man would be inspired to do what he did based on what he seems to believe. I don't know if you saw any of the clips of him in the DRC in the Congo trying to be a charismatic evangelical and failing fucking miserably at it.
Yeah.
His speeches are really bad. But who let him go there in the first place? That's a good question. I don't know.
It's a weird one. It's a very weird one. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, there's a serious mental health crisis across the world right now. I mean, people are more unstable than ever. I think that's definitely a contributing factor in the waves of violence. I mean, I that said, though, I do think of specific events. I think of the quote unquote assassination attempt on Trump. I think that was an extremely extremely important event, as it's proving to be continuously. I mean, look, even we can return to our good pal Mike Huckabee. It's still on his mind.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, I think the Boston Marathon bombing is also a very interesting one. Stephen Paddock. I mean, all these events that just don't make a lot of sense.
Stephen Paddock. That is as American Gladio as the 21st century will get.
And they never had to answer for it. There was never any explanation, just fear, But then also we forget about it. We forget about it. I think that I think I cut this out of my last episode, but I talked about strategy of tension, and I thought it made me think of the tension of a guitar string, and it needs to be tuned ever so slightly every once in a while. And so that means that there needs to be a sort of slow drip of these events to keep this fear alive in the public. And so I feel because, like we said, how effective Gladio was in Europe and rooting out pretty much every socialist element of what ought to be the most socialist part of the world, the countries most amenable to socialism, they did it. They fucking won. So if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Why wouldn't they apply the same thing to us?
Absolutely. And but we also have to wonder, do they even need it anymore?
That's
like you said, it's do they even need a false flag event to declare war on Iran? Probably not anymore. Even if we look at 23 years ago now, when they were starting to bang the war drum for Iraq, there was way more opposition then than there even is. Okay. Let me put it actually this way. There might be more opposition today to a war with Iran, but you're not going to see the same protests and the same sort of unrest that was created by the people that were against Iraq back then.
Yeah, I mean that was so funny about attending the No Kings protest is that there was zero anything about Iran. It was like it wasn't even fucking happening. And I'm at the No Kings protest, looking at my phone, watching war happen on my phone. I'm like, is anybody gonna say? Does anyone want to comment on this? Like, it was so bizarre. It was like a complete denial of the reality of the world. I think that I subscribe to this notion, and I'm stealing from the drug cartels do not exist theory, that drug cartels do exist like in practice, but they aren't real, and that they're a creation of the state.
Yes.
I feel the same way about terrorism. Like terrorism does not exist in my mind. Like I think that almost nearly every terroristic event, and I don't necessarily include like school shootings and events like that, and perhaps even this Vance Bolter assassination attempt, but I do look at every event as because it benefits the state somehow. It doesn't matter if it's coordinated by the state or not.
Yeah, I mean, I think it could even be like, and I'm gonna get like maybe I'm gonna get too like ontological here, but like I think that like the state apparatus and the media apparatus, which, you know, are very closely linked, they decide what events are considered terror events and which events are just considered, I don't know, a mental health crisis or whatever else they want to call it. Like, or if they even want the event to stick around at all. Like, look at the Las Vegas shooting that we were just talking about. That's the most lethal mass shooting event in U.S. history. Yet it never gets discussed. The anniversary is never raised. Nobody. I mean, I never hear about it in the collective, you know, media sphere outside of, you know, the parapol circles that I follow on Twitter. It's truly bizarre, that event, and it just shows how much control they have over the narrative of what is considered a terror event and what is not. Because if you ask somebody to name the top 5 terror events in the last 5 years in the United States, the average person walking down the street will probably not mention Stephen Paddock. No, I mean it has been completely memory hold, and no one seems to want to know any further answers, even though a considerable amount of victims. How like open it was, how videotaped it was. I mean, it is one of those incredibly bizarre events that everyone seems to have thrown their hands up at and been like, yeah, I don't know. I think that what was interesting about the Stephen Paddock thing, though, was that I don't remember it having like a particularly political angle. It didn't seem like anybody was trying to blame one side or another for the Paddock event. No,
sorry, go on.
I do wonder, like, did he? I mean, he was aided, right? Like, he was helped. Like, the people looked the other way, but like, did he truly just fucking lose it?
It's within the realm of possibility that you could just fucking lose it. To do that, like, all the things that were required to lose it, the amount. Usually, when you lose it, there's not that much coordinating and planning. You know,
yeah,
like, you kind of just snap. But who knows? Maybe he was in like some months-long fugue state and managed to like accomplish what he did. I think what's interesting about the Vance Bolter assassination that kind of falls under a sort of loose Gladio is that there is this coordinated right-wing effort to paint Vance Bolter as a left-wing communist.
Right.
And that's the real Gladio element that I think about when it comes to these European states blaming every single act of terror they could on the left. And so now that it's been clarified relatively quickly, but it's almost like whoever gets the first story out there wins. That's the most important thing. Is the first narrative is always the strongest, because then you have to spend all this time trying to dismantle that initial misinformation instead of actually talking about what's going on.
Yep, totally. No, I agree. And the only thing I would say is that I don't know if the left is even really the like main threat anymore in the U.S. you know, Overton window. I think the main threat right now would be, or the main sort of scapegoated group would probably be either a Palestinian or an Iranian most recently.
Yeah, I mean, that is true. I guess that Vance Bolter didn't get the note to, instead of having the No Kings paper in his car, which by the way is very funny to me that like it was evidence that he was like a leftist, that he had like the most like Kinko's printed No Kings like 9x12 printer sheets as evidence that he was a leftist or whatever.
Yeah, he was at the Maoist group at the brunch.
Yeah. Malmosas.
Yeah, good, very good.
Thank you. I think you're right. I think that that would make the most sense to have some sort of terror event. And you had those recently with the shooting at the embassy.
Yeah.
Which, you know, like that's also, it's not memory hold, but like that came and went.
It really did.
It really, like, nobody talks about it anymore. I think we're just like super numb to it, and the same way that we scroll through our phones is the way we're scrolling through history.
Yeah, I mean, it's they have us right where they want us, right? I mean, it's just you get on your phone, you doom scroll, you get your daily dose of trauma, and then you move on.
Yeah. So let's try to end this episode on a more hopeful note.
Oh yeah, honestly, man, you're a real one for this. I always appreciate it at the end of your shows.
I don't like. I'm not one to despair. You know, we'll see what happens, but I guess the question is, what advice would you give to people to see through Gladio?
I don't know, like
listen to our shows. Is that
yeah, listen to our shows.
Yeah, I'll tell you what's what.
Yeah. The only Isaac and I know what's real and what's not. Right? Like
we're anointed. We are anointed.
Yeah. No, I don't know. I mean, it's just like, honestly, like maybe this is going to be a boring answer and people might not like it. Like I find refuge in history more than I much prefer focusing my attention on digging into old shit because there's much more written about it and the picture is much clearer. I find looking at current events dizzying, especially nowadays, like where images are so easily manipulated. I mean, we're seeing this with the recent attacks on Tel Aviv. So many videos that are just AI generated shit that are almost indistinguishable too. Like the only way I can really tell is that usually like the explosions are too big, but otherwise they look like real videos.
It's almost like you need like multiple angles to corroborate it, and you can kind of cross-reference them.
Exactly, and this is really like the first time that I've really like felt this in a conflict. Like maybe a bit Russia-Ukraine, but this AI video thing is really coming into its own here.
Oh yeah.
So that's what I'll say. Like, I mean, if you are going to get into this endless, hall of mirrors, start with the old shit. I mean, the new stuff, it'll make your mind go crazy and you're just going to get psyoped. I mean, it's inevitable with this new stuff. Like, as much as you might think that you're keen and you're sharp and you're not going to fall for it. I mean, it's everywhere. It's omnipresent and I don't even know what's true or false anymore, and we probably won't for decades.
That's a really interesting point, that the only truth that can be seen is from decades past, and I think that's what helps you see these patterns, because like I keep saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Like we never managed to stop them from what they're doing, and the tactics they've used, while they've evolved slightly, still remain the same.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean,
and so I do think that looking back at history will help you understand like what's going on right now.
Always.
And that's a great plug for your show, Eyes Wide Open. I'm a big fan. I think that I've not to like no homo here, but I've been falling asleep to your voice a lot recently, like watching your videos. That was a joke too. I mean that there's layers to the joke I just made. I'm not homophobic. I'll make that very clear.
I don't think anybody got that idea.
I don't know if anyone's made it this deep into the episode. If they tapped out. But anyway,
now clutching their pearls. Yeah.
Love your videos. Incredibly thorough.
Thank you.
And tightly wound. So if you're not already, go subscribe to Eyes Wide Open, either on YouTube or Patreon. and you'll understand what's going on.
Hopefully. I mean, the way I like to describe it is I use the all-you-can-eat buffet fire hose method. So if you even take away a couple of interesting tidbits and go further, I'm happy. It's a lot of information. But yeah, please check it out.